Hi everyone, for my accessibility evaluation, I'm going to be checking out two different resources I use with my third grade students. The first is a Google Slides and the second is a Google Doc. So first I'm going to check out the Google Slides, and when looking at the accessibility, online accessibility of a PowerPoint, the first important thing to consider is looking at the outline view to make sure that there's clear headings and a nicely formatted outline. One downside to Google Slides is it does not have an outline view the way that Microsoft PowerPoint does. So that's something to consider. I might want to save this as a PowerPoint instead, or consider creating my slides in Microsoft PowerPoint over Google Slides. The next thing you want to look at is the slide layout and make sure that you use a template that's already formatted. So typically you want to avoid using the blank templates. And that's because the blank templates won't be formatted as well to be read by a screen reader. So as I look through mine, this was something that was done pretty well. Typically I used a layout that was already provided to create most of my slides. Really the only ones that don't are this one where I only have an image, and my slides where I project the must-do, may-do lists and independent reading expectations, because I added a table onto a blank slide for those. But otherwise, they all use a pre-existing and pre-formatted layout. So this ties into the next point, which is reading order, and you want to take a look at how the text you have on your slides would be read by a screen reader. And you can do this by pressing Tab and seeing the order that your text boxes get highlighted in. So I found that on some of mine, they were read in the order that I wanted, but others not so much. So for example, this one where I define inferences, ideally it would read the title followed by the definition of making inferences and then read the visual aloud, but it jumps from the title down to the visual. So that's something I would have to change the formatting of prior to assigning it to my students for and having them use a screen reader to access the content on here. This slide is formatted correctly, as is this one. So like I said, some were formatted the way I'd like, some not so much, but I would want to change the ones that weren't formatted correctly to make sure they would be accessible to my students who would be utilizing a screen reader. The next thing I took a look at was the images. And so if you look at my images here, you want to make sure that when you go to format options, you have alternate text describing what that image shows. This one is missing that alternate text, and I found that all of my images were, so this is something that I didn't consider before and is something I will definitely do going forward. I did go in the meantime and add alternate text to this one photo to kind of show how I could do that. So I said a boy wearing a jacket and rain boots is walking his dog through a puddle. I included all those details because all those details would be important in order for my students to discuss this question, what can you infer from this picture? They need to know those details in order to make the inference that it must have just rained or it was a rainy day. Otherwise, they wouldn't be successful with that task. The next thing you want to consider is lists. And when you're making lists, if it's important that steps are in a particular order, you want to use a numbered list. But if it's a set of characteristics of something or qualities of something, and it doesn't matter what order they're in, then that's when you want to use your bulleted lists. Typically, I am good at doing that. I just don't happen to have any lists in this particular lesson. The next thing you want to consider is your links. And when you link something, you want to make sure that there's clear text describing what the link is taking you to, and that the text is hyperlinked so it's easy for students to find. So this first image is actually a link, and it's linked this way because typically I use these slides as a teacher to facilitate my instruction. They're not something that I normally assign to my students to navigate independently, and so I just like having everything housed in one place. That said, if I were teaching in more of an online setting or I wanted my students to have access to these for the sake of using them to support them during their independent work activities, I would want to make sure that instead of just having this link here, I had a text box that says, click this link to watch a video called Snack Attack. And then I could also have a text box saying, think about these questions as you watch the video. And I could list the questions that I have down here in the notes section that we typically talk about in class when we're all together. But then that could be there for students if they were learning asynchronously or synchronously, but kind of wanted to go back to review what we had been learning that day. Going along with that, when you have a video, you want to make sure the video link is clear. So like I said, this one didn't do such a great job at that. It also said it's important to have the link go to an external, like a new tab or a new window. That is one thing that this already did, and they said that's preferable to embedding the video. The last few points have to do with tables. So something that was really eye-opening to me that I didn't know prior to reading these articles this week is how a screen reader reads tables. It reads tables from left to right, top to bottom. Typically, I format my tables vertically in the sense that I have column headings and then the information in each column. But really, you should have like a row heading and then the information go across the row because it reads one row at a time left to right. So the best way to explain that is using my must-do, may-do list here. If I wanted this to be accessible to students using a screen reader, I would need to reformat it. So I would type must-do here, but then I would have the must-do work listed out in this box so that the screen reader would read must-do followed by the work options. Then in the second row, I would have may-do followed by the may-do work. That way it would make more sense and be more easily understood to my students who are utilizing a screen reader. You also want to consider color contrast just to make sure that students will be able to see the text that's on your slides. So it's always important to either have dark text against a light background or light text against a dark background. And all of these slides did a good job at doing either one or the other of those. And then finally, if you are using a math or science equation or formula, Google Slides is also not the best option for that. They don't really have an accessible option. However, you might want to consider using Microsoft PowerPoint. So as I was reflecting on this particular set of slides that I used with my students, I was thinking also about how they're accessible in the sense of the UDL framework that Rice kind of touched on, and how they support the differentiation for the needs of diverse learners. So some things that I thought were done well throughout these slides and throughout the lesson were they provided those multiple opportunities to engage with the content in different ways and learn the content in different formats. I have a combination of videos with text, with photos, with discussion, with writing activities and graphic organizers. And so together, all of that can help support my students who might struggle with executive functioning or might struggle with representing what they've learned and showing what they know, or support students who sometimes struggle to learn through just text or learn through just audio because they kind of get a mix of it all throughout this lesson. Something else that was done well is I have some active participation opportunities in here which can really help support student engagement, like here where they're talking about what they can infer from the picture. In the video that I show in the beginning, I stop throughout it and have some discussion prompts. And then another way that I support students' executive functioning is every day during independent reading, I project a slide with expectations of what that looks like and sounds like, and just those self-regulation prompts can help keep them engaged on task and focused on what they're supposed to be doing. That said, some other things that I could have done better are I might want to consider having the lesson recorded, whether that I'm teaching it in a synchronous or asynchronous environment. If I'm teaching it synchronously, I could record it and have the video and transcript available for students after the fact, especially if they struggle with processing like auditory and they're more visual learners, or they just like to hear things again. The other thing that definitely could be done better, and I know I struggle with a lot, is I like to find these themed slides go PowerPoints, and the downside to them is they have a lot going on every slide. Like there's trees, there's leaves, there's colors galore, and so for my students who struggle with focusing their attention, because their attention is just like focused on everything and easily distracted by everything, as Rice kind of explains. You want to keep it more simple for them so that their attention is directed to the important ideas and not drawn to the extraneous stuff like the leaves and the trees and the branches. So I could make this more accessible for my students who typically struggle with focusing their attention by having more plain solid colored backgrounds so that they were focusing either on the pictures I wanted to be looking at, or the organizers I wanted them to be looking at, or the text I wanted them to be looking at. So those were some strengths and downfalls of these slides that I typically use with my third graders. And now that I've learned more about what makes online slides more accessible, I definitely plan to consider changing the formatting of my tables, incorporating alternate text, making my links clearer, and reducing the clutter and especially unnecessary clutter on my slides to help my students with their focus. I'm actually going to end this first video here because I am about to run out of time on ScreenPal, and I'll go through my second resource in a new screencast. So please check out that one also to see an overview of the worksheet that I'm going to analyze.